Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today and welcome to BuzzBack's latest webinar, Building Brand Love. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. However, you may submit questions at any time today by typing them through the chat feature located to the left of your screen. We'll be fielding questions at the end of the presentation. And as a reminder, today's call is being recorded and will be offered at the conclusion of today's event. I would like to take this time to introduce you to Carol Fitzgerald, President and CEO of BuzzBack. As the founder and owner of BuzzBack, Carol is an experienced senior-level executive with proven success in the management of both established and startup companies. She started BuzzBack with a vision of changing how consumers interact with marketers online, focusing on making the experience engaging and fun. This year, she received an Enterprising Woman of the Year award, recognizing fast-growth businesses, women who mentor or actively support other women, and girls involved in entrepreneurship, and stand out as leaders in their communities. Carol is a cum laude graduate of Dartmouth College, and her honors thesis on T.S. Eliot continues to be cited in academic works on the author. Carol, please go ahead.
Thanks, Melanie. Hi, everyone. We're in New York City, so if you hear sirens and things like that in the background, I apologize. Hopefully they won't be too loud today. It's hard to control. So today we're going to talk a little bit about building brand love. So first, just kind of an overview of what we'll cover. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about why we picked this topic and a few things to think about in terms of how it's relevant. Secondly, we will share a couple of mini case studies where we actually fielded research that give you examples of building brand love or the kind of research you might do in order to do that. And then third, just some considerations to think about going forward. So for those of you who are not too familiar with BuzzBack, we have a range of online projectives, a portfolio of different techniques that we use. They're all very visually focused, and they are designed to elicit emotion, subconscious, visual, verbal, all these different kinds of insights that you might incorporate into a study like this. I'll actually show you an example of our collage technique later. Also, we work with about half of the top global consumer product companies, top 50 global, and have MSAs with 10 of the top 20 global pharmaceutical companies, and we're preferred at many of these. And they use us in similar ways. My fun fact is last year I actually visited 105 clients, and I actually counted on that. And part of the reason that's relevant is that what I found is that everyone's focused on brand love, even some of the healthcare companies where you might not expect it. So what is brand love? If you've been to a conference, an Insight conference in the past few months, you may have seen one of the senior folks at Unilever talking about brand love and what their vision is for marketing. And essentially what they mean by that is engaging with the consumer in a totally different way when it comes to your brand. So as a couple of examples of that, first, you're probably familiar with this packaging from Coke. They do it that way. You engage with your name. You look for the product of choice relative to that. And then Disney has done it recently with the Magic Bands. And if you're not familiar with that, what Magic Bands are technology-enabled bands that let you open your hotel room when you're at a Disney resort, go on rides, even order food and make purchases. And their whole goal with the Magic Band is to develop a frictionless experience with Disney. And so that's how they are sort of thinking about brand love and engaging with the consumer. So one other thing to think about as you go forward and focus on innovation is they say the future of making your brand verbable, right? And what does that mean? Well, when I worked for Fortune Brands many years ago, we got in trouble if we made a Xerox or used a Kleenex. The lawyers were all on top of us. Well, today, actually, when you think about innovating, you actually want to make your brand verbable. So I'm sure, all of us Google, but it's also about, using Uber and Instagram and tweeting and all those other things. And as you think about your innovation, you want to think about how you can engage with the consumer that way. If you'd like to have a copy of this article, we're happy to share that with you. You can just request that. So what are clients focused on? They're definitely focused on the attributes and the functional and the emotional. Many of you track some of these things in your brand trackers on a regular basis. But what we'd like to talk about today is show you other things that contribute to building brand love. What are those other kinds of cues about your brand that you're looking to communicate to consumers? So they might be sensorial cues, things like that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I mentioned Unilever earlier, and at this point it's going to take a second for the video to load. This is an example of an ad. You may need to turn your speakers up.
Dove Men Plus Care. Care makes a man stronger.
So that's an example of how they focus on the insight to communicate Dove, and you may not have even known that that was the product. Unilever spends billions of dollars, are one of the top advertisers last year in creating brand love, right? And some of us obviously don't have those kinds of budgets, so we're looking for other ways to focus on brand love and understand the perceptions of our brand. So today we're going to look at a couple of different applications. The first is what we would call sort of a brand essence, right? So what does the consumer think of my brand? What does it stand for? What are their perceptions? What's the visual they associate with it, et cetera. The second is we'll look a little bit more at a territory exploratory. So maybe you have a platform or something that you're looking to innovate around, and you want to see, does my brand fit with that, or how do I take it to that new platform? And we'll focus on premium as a platform there coming off our recent webinar. So we'll go through two examples around that. Okay. So let's go into the first one. So one of the questions that we wanted to ask for this webinar is, can you actually look at brand essence for a drug, like a healthcare serious pharmaceutical, right? And we decided to focus on Humira. Humira is one of the top drugs and also one of the biggest advertisers when it comes to DTC advertising. They spent, I believe, nearly $300 million advertising Humira last year. It's available for a number of different indications. For this mini study, we focus on rheumatoid arthritis. So we actually recruited consumers who have been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and who are familiar with Humira. And we wanted to see what were their perceptions of Humira. What comes to mind when you think of Humira, both visually, verbally, et cetera. So we first look at the words that they associated with Humira, and what we find is that there's playback around efficacy, right? So it's effective, it's helpful, it works, it's reliable, it's good, it provides relief. Those are things that we might consider attributes or functional specifically. We also looked at Humira on a continuum relative to some of the competitive brands in the space for RA, right? So we looked at specific attributes on the left-hand side and where Humira fits relative to some of the other medications that it sits with in the marketplace. And what you can see here is that there are not a lot of distinct differences. So it's hard to see, you know, where is Humira really different from this kind of question per se. So what we also did is we conducted a collage exercise. And if you're familiar with our collaging technique, it's based on the offline collaging exercise where you're using images as catalysts to get to the words. Remember when I showed you our projectives, they all use visuals because as researchers, we ask questions with words, yet people don't really think with words. They think with images and sounds. And so we need different kinds of cues to get beneath the surface. Now, with the collage, the respondent actually builds a collage in response to a question. So in this case, it was what comes to mind when you think of Humira, right? And they can select images from the library, and the library is actually custom to the question. So a researcher on our team works with your team, your agency, whoever's involved in the project to select images that are specific to the question. And we look to have a balance of images, positive and negative, colors, textures, et cetera. They can choose a background color, add captions, as you can see. And when they're done, we ask them to talk about it. We'll show you this application later for premium specifically. So what do we get? So one of the first things that we look at are the collage examples. And here's where you start to see a little bit of change in what we learn about Humira. So in these two examples, the consumers are talking about how Humira is empowering. It enables me to function, which means seeing clearly and not blurry, as you see in the right-hand collage. It provides freedom from pain. And you start to get these metaphors and very rich language that are extremely personal. we've actually done side-by-side work with collage where we ask somebody an open-ended question both with and without a collage, and what we find on average is that we get double the word count. But for us, it's not just about the word count. It's about the personal aspect and the emotional aspect and the language that becomes the base for your insight. And clients love